My name is Dr. G. Welcome to That's Unusual, my podcast uncovering the unusual stories behind the world's most interesting people. On this show, we celebrate what makes us different and how we convert those differences into unexpected opportunities. Welcome to this week's episode of That's Unusual. I'm so grateful to the thousands of listeners who tune in each week. If you haven't done so yet, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher so you don't miss an episode. Today, I'm joined by Larry Kopald, who shares his life's crusade to tackle global warming by putting carbon back where it belongs, underground in the soil. Larry and I discuss the groundbreaking work being done through his latest company, the Carbon Underground. He gives us a brief history of the evolution of industrial agriculture, the role carbon plays in our climate, the implications of climate change if not reversed soon, the challenges faced by the new administration, and much, much more. We even get up close and personal by delving into his childhood, revealing the influences that shaped his current thinking, and explore how being a veteran advertising executive created a natural evolution from converting his powers of persuasion into a world movement. I hope you enjoy our thought-provoking conversation on this very important mission to help slow down global warming that will undoubtedly impact many generations to come. As you listen to this episode, I ask that you reflect on your own unusual stories and qualities that can help open doors to unexpected opportunities. And so with that, let's get started. Welcome to That's Unusual. I have with me here today my good friend and guest, Larry Kopald. Welcome to the show, Larry.
Thanks. Great to be here.
So you are a man of many accomplishments, and I think you're doing probably one of the most profound pieces of work that's oftentimes goes, unappreciated by many with the Carbon Underground. And I certainly want to have a nice, deep conversation in terms of your thinking behind the Carbon Underground. But if you could, so our listeners could get a sense of who you are as an individual and how you actually got to this point, can you walk us through some of your early adventures and journeys and influences that brought you to this point?
Sure thing. I grew up in Chicago. It was an interesting childhood because my grandfather started a company called Dad's Root Beer, which was kind of the Coca-Cola of Chicago. To this day, it's a big Chicago company. And my grandfather started, he happened to die an hour after I was born in the same hospital. It was a strange sort of transference. And my dad then ran the company for 37 years. So, it was kind of fun growing up associated to that. I grew up with a knowledge from probably the age of 3 that I was going to be a veterinarian. I was going to work with animals. I knew that. I was positive of that. And that drove sort of, where I was going to go professionally all the way through college. I went through pre-veterinary medicine and got into vet school and went all the way through until 3 weeks before graduation when I quit because I learned that, and this is, a long time ago, but back then, if you wanted to be a vet and you wanted to economically support yourself, you made about a third of your income euthanizing puppies and kittens. And I went, no, I'm done. I'm out. And so I quit and now what do you do? And I had always, my whole life, I've been fascinated by business. A lot of that's my dad's doing. And I have been sort of a devotee of creativity my whole life. Probably also my dad's doing. He was exceptionally creative. And I realized that the
Did you get involved with your dad's business at all?
I didn't. I worked there when I was a kid. In the summers, I would work at the factory, and it was brutal work. It was, I was 16, 17 years old. I was working on the line where it was 125 degrees, and they would come in and shove salt tablets in your mouth so you wouldn't faint. And, it was great. I'm glad I did it. And the first year I did it, the plant manager didn't want me back because I guess I sort of slacked, and it taught me a great lesson. I embarrassed my dad. I embarrassed myself. And I talked him into letting me come back the next summer, and I kicked butt. And I was really, really motivated. But I learned a lot of lessons. I learned the lesson of doing good work. And I learned a lesson. The guys in the factory, as always happens, they hate the guys in management. But the one guy they didn't dislike, they loved my dad. And it took me a while to realize they weren't just saying that because he was my dad. My dad would walk the factory all the time, and he knew every guy. He knew their kids. He knew what they were doing in school. And this humanity lesson is something that I hope, became a good teacher and a good lesson to who I am. So very influential.
And so how did that influence you? Then you got into sort of this interest in business and the creative side of business. What happened after you left the world of veterinarian?
So I thought, all right, what can I do that can sort of bring that together? And I thought about the advertising business, which is, all about growing clients' businesses. And so what I did is I looked at going onto the creative end of advertising. I went back, I got a master's degree in it. And I went to Madison Avenue and I got a job and I never looked back. And for 25 years, I worked at and ran some of the biggest agencies in the world. I ran the advertising for McDonald's and IBM and Coke and, big brands at different times in my career. Ran the creative end of the advertising and started my own agency in the late 90s. We combined, that's when technology was first starting to impact business and marketing. Mm-hmm. And so we started a company called Think New Ideas. And it was very, very early on. I mean, most people didn't even have email. We ended up doing the first e-commerce site. We wrote the code for it. We put 40 of the Fortune 100 on the internet for the first time. I know it makes me sound old, but remarkably, that was less than 20 years ago. And it was great. The company went from a few guys in a garage to 700 people in under 2 years. And we went public. And although we went for that weird reason of raising operational money, not to get rich. It was very heady. And we felt like, along with all the technology companies out there, we were all sort of building this thing as we're flying 600 miles an hour. So it was great. It was phenomenal.
Is that company still in existence?
No, we sold the company in 2007 to a very large technology company that looked at us as the front end of what they were doing. We recommended they don't buy us. We did not think it was a strategic fit. They then offered us, an offer too good to be true, and we ended up taking it. And they ended up writing off the acquisition about 3 years later. It didn't work.
So then what did you do following the acquisition? Did you stick around for a little bit? Did you, where does the Carbon Underground really come into play after that? So after that, I got into political work. I have always, throughout my career, because I love communications. It's what I was doing on the advertising side. So I had always done pro bono work for politicians and political causes that I believed in, always. And when we sold Think, I got a phone call from a guy who runs the biggest holding company in the world of communications companies who I knew. And he asked me if I would get involved. They just bought the biggest Democratic shop in the country. Would I get involved in it? And I spent 3 years doing that. And I worked on a lot of great stuff. And I did, gubernatorial and senatorial races. I worked on the core team for John Kerry's presidential run. And, what I learned, this is me personally, I kind of realized doing it pro bono, where I could choose who I really believed in and wanted to try and help, was very different than doing it for a living. And I didn't like the business. I don't like politics. I don't think it's good for the country. And I ended up, getting out and going back and still doing it, going back to doing it pro bono. But for those who I really truly believe in, which is harder and harder to find these days, but they're still there. And then, so I did that for about 3 years. Now, at the same time, my whole career, and I say it that way because it was not a passion growing up. I was not one of those guys who lived in nature. My parents didn't, take us on long hikes. It wasn't that. But about the time I started in my career in New York, I got involved in the environmental movement, and I've never looked back. And I'm on the board of Greenpeace. I was a founding member of Oceana and 1% for the Planet, big groups. And it's a very, very, very serious passion of mine. And about 3 years ago, it was actually at a Greenpeace board meeting where we had
had some briefings on climate change. And, what I'll tell you is that the data on climate change are way beyond what they're telling us. The data are horrific. And what the IPCC is telling the United Nations and the reports being given to Parliament and Congress about the real data, it's terrifying. And it shows a very, very, very short window for us to do something about it before cataclysmic events begin to happen. And so after this meeting, I was lamenting with one of the other board members, great, I just want to go home and shoot myself. And he said, well, there is this other data coming in. And he's, like me, had grown up in the business world, but he's a botanist, pretty serious botanist. And he said there's data coming in from all over the world that shows the way we're looking at climate change is all wrong. And that conversation changed my life, led to he and I starting the Carbon Underground. And you know what? The beauty of it is I wake up every morning with hope instead of despair. So that I'm focusing not 100% of my time on this, but most of it, shall we say?
Well, I was lucky enough last year, you spoke at our annual event, Unusual Intersections, and you shared some of the thinking behind the Carbon Underground. And I'll tell you, I was blown away by that science and some of the information that you shared, which is pretty contrary to what, how we've been approaching climate change and global warming and environmental protection in a very different way, looking at carbon as sort of the imbalance of carbon as sort of a driving factor of why we're seeing significant climate change. Can you tell us a little bit about the thesis behind the Carbon Underground and some of the science driving it?
Absolutely. So first of all, we have to realize, we have to learn, all of us, that number one, carbon is not our enemy. We've made it the enemy. We have to reduce carbon. We have to stop emissions. The truth of the matter is carbon is a ubiquitous element. We have never, ever produced one molecule of it. All we do, all us carbon-based life forms do, is we move carbon around. We dig it out of the ground, we burn it, we put it in the atmosphere, we put it in the ocean. All we do is move it around. And so that's number one. So looking at reducing carbon is the wrong approach. So that's number one. Number two, the strategy to solve climate change, of which I was a very active part of for many, 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 many years, the reduction of emissions and the fighting of fossil fuel impacts, is I don't want to say it's a useless endeavor, but it's a useless endeavor if we do not draw carbon back down from the atmosphere. And I'll explain that. So the U.S. government's NOAA, the greatest climate science organization in the world, Stephen Chu, our ex-Secretary of Energy, they have said emphatically that if we were to reduce carbon emissions to zero today, it would take anywhere from 300 to 1,000 years for the carbon we've already emitted to stop damaging the atmosphere and allow the planet to begin to heal. So a strategy, which is our global strategy in the UN, the Paris Accord, everything is to reduce emissions, is a fool's errand, or whatever the expression is, if we do not draw carbon down. So the good news is, this is where it gets really exciting. The good news is we can do it starting today. We don't have to build anything. There's the greatest shovel-ready engine ready to do this, and it's called photosynthesis. So let me explain. Carbon, and again, this is stuff that I didn't realize a couple of years ago, and I'm now on a mission to get people who have the leverage to change this educated and motivated to do something. So we all learned about photosynthesis in third grade, and we all remember that that it splits up the molecule, it gives us oxygen to breathe, but we never focus on what happens to the other part of that molecule, the carbon. And what happens in a healthy system, and I'm talking about the carbon cycle now. You know how we have a water cycle with the evaporative elements. There's a carbon cycle as well, and it moves between the four carbon sinks: the atmosphere, the soil, the terrestrial carbon, every living thing on Earth, and the oceans. So photosynthesis is really the engine that keeps that balanced. And so these plants, what happens is in the soil, there are microorganisms. In every teaspoon of healthy soil, there's 7 billion living things.
Wow.
And every one of them needs carbon to live, same way we do. They can't get it on their own. And what do they have? They have potassium, they have nitrogen in excess. And if you've ever gardened, you know that plants need that stuff. So they say to the plants, tell you what, we'll give you the stuff you need if you go up in the atmosphere and bring us down some of that carbon. That's what photosynthesis does. And so, in the soil is the biggest barter system in the history of the universe going on. And again, 7 billion living things per teaspoon asking for carbon. So what happened is a couple of 100 years ago, we started destroying our soil. And then we really ramped it up with industrial techniques. So whether it's putting chemicals on that not only kill the pests above the ground, they kill all those living organisms under the ground. So all of a sudden, the demand for carbon just drops through the floor. And the plants are no longer being asked to go up and get carbon. And in fact, if they bring it down, there's nobody who wants it. They have no place to do it. So what they're doing is they're leaving it up there. So number one, what we've learned is that as far as greenhouse gas emissions, industrial agriculture is responsible for probably an equal amount, depending on studies, it could be a little less or a little more, but basically the same amount as all the fossil fuels being burned on the planet. So number one, it's throwing it up there by killing all of these carbon-based life forms that then, evaporate in the cycle and go up. It does it by churning the soil, which also kills them. So now you're emitting all of this stuff into the atmosphere, which is not a problem. We're at 402 parts per million today. As we all know, we should be at 350. And the Earth has been as high as 7,000 a couple of times, and during volcanic areas. And every time what happens is nature ramped up photosynthesis, drew all that carbon back into the soil, rebalanced the carbon cycle, and there was an explosion of abundance on Earth every time. So nature's gone from 7,000 to 260 a few times. All we're asking her to do is take us from 400 to 350. I mean, it's a blip. So we know, nature is literally dying to take her carbon back. So the reason we have climate change, and this is the exciting part, because we can deal with it. The reason we have climate change is not that we're putting all that stuff in the atmosphere. It's that we're shutting down the engine that draws it back down and puts it back. So all we have to do is restore the health of our soil. And if we restore the health of our soil, nature will draw that carbon down pretty quickly, by the way. I mean, we're talking about starting in the first year, anywhere from, depending on what you're growing and where you're growing it, anywhere from 1.5 tons per hectare to 40 tons per hectare per year. So that's, 20 tons per acre of carbon being drawn down every year per acre. So it's an astonishing amount of carbon that we can draw back down. So now the trick is, can we achieve enough scale before that window closes? We don't have to solve climate change. All we have to do is we have to reverse the arrow. We have to start drawing down more than we're putting up. And once we do that, then we extend the runway that gets us to a carbon neutral society.
So does that mean that we have to do away with a lot of the developments that have occurred around industrial agriculture or modify those ways?
Yes and no. You can still do things at scale. You can still have very large scale farms. That's not an issue. But what you can't do is you can't deep till your soil. You can't churn it up, which is done for efficiency reasons. You can't grow monocrops, because if all you grow is one crop, it kills the soil. And this is a really, really important point. We talk about we've lost our topsoil. We've killed about 70% of our topsoil globally used for growing food. And the UN says we have 60 years left. Actually, but they said we have 60 harvests left before we're out of topsoil. India said they have 1 generation of growing food left. The United States says we have maybe till the end of this century, and then there's no more soil at the rate we're going. And by the way, that whole framing from industrial ag folks of we're going to starve to death without industrial ag, the truth is, based on what I just said, we're going to starve to death with it. We have to regrow, regenerate soil, which is what we're working on. Again, you can, to your question, we can do it at scale, but you have to do it differently. So you don't till the soil, or you very, very lightly till the soil each season. It's better not to touch it at all. You don't use chemicals, or you use very, very little. Ideal is none at all. But there's wonderfully successful regenerative farms, big, 10, 20, 30,000 acre farms that are using a little bit of an herbicide every couple seasons. And, obviously we all wish they wouldn't, because we should be eating healthy, pure organic food. But from the standpoint of climate change, and it's really important to understand the carbon underground is a one-trick pony. We are focused on changing how we grow our food to reverse climate change. We're not about healthy food or organic or GMOs. Those are all, we support all that. Mm-hmm. But, our feeling is this is an existential crisis that if we don't deal with climate change in the next 10 years, significantly change that carbon arrow in the next 10 years, none of those things are going to matter.
So this is one of the pieces that's really, as part of the puzzle, designed to proactively reverse some of the damage that we've done. Otherwise, if we do nothing and continue the way we are, we'll be shit out of luck in a few decades, if not sooner, given the pace that we're going in terms of some of the development and damage we're doing from the carbon imbalance. This is a huge, huge thing to tackle. I mean, one, from the educational standpoint, an understanding about the implications of carbon and how soil essentially can bring that carbon back into and what we need to do to focus on soil. Is this predominantly, in your view, I mean, what's the biggest hurdle? Is it an economic issue? Is it a policy issue? Is it an innovation issue? All of the above? I mean, how do you go about solving this? What are you doing to solve this?
It's a great question. I mean, it's the key question. The biggest obstacle we have are people who have a vested interest in the status quo, which is usually the obstacle to big change. But here's why I got excited. This is what got me really excited from the get-go. There's a lot of solutions to big problems out there that never get implemented for whatever. There's no will, there's power behind the status quo, there's no funding, whatever it is. This is something that takes the biggest industry on earth, the food industry, $7 trillion industry, and makes it more profitable. It makes the supply chains more secure. It reduces input costs. So I'm sitting there going, big business is going to love this. This is going to help them achieve their needs. We always say, follow the money. Well, you know what? This is going to lead the money. Mm-hmm. This is an absolute profit enhancer. It's an absolute supply chain rebuilder. And by the way, back to that thing about it rebuilds soil. If you're running a big company and you're looking down the road and you go, oh my God, we're not going to have any place to grow our ingredients. And this is not just food, it's apparel as well, which is the third largest industry on earth. And you need cotton and you need dyes and you need wool and all the things that are based on agriculture. So this is a massive impact to the business world. And that's what got me excited. So for Tom and I, Tom Newmark is the co-founder with me, and he and I have lived in the C-suites of big companies for the last 20 some odd years. And so we know that language. So we don't walk in most cases, and talk about climate change. We walk in and talk about supply chain. We walk in and talk about inputs and reduction of input costs.
Yeah.
We go in and we talk about that kind of stuff. And, oh, by the way, your carbon footprint is going to go down. The commitment you've made to Wall Street about your carbon footprint is going to be much easier to achieve. If you're a consumer product, the ability to tell your consumers that your brand is helping to reverse climate change is good for your business. So that's where this thing got exciting. So, we have worked with companies from Patagonia to P&G and Unilever. And you know what? We had a phenomenal meeting with McDonald's recently, and these companies are getting it. And I think one of the reasons they're getting it is, as happened in the meeting with McDonald's, and they had their biggest beef suppliers in the meeting, they realized that the way they're going right now is a dead end. And they have to change how they're raising beef. And let's not even get into the beef issue, but, I'm somebody who's gone from saying I think it's the biggest scourge on the environment to somebody believes that we need more cows if we're going to save the planet because they're going to help us restore the soil. So, it was an interesting meeting, but at the end of the meeting, one of their top suppliers made the first comment and was, I don't see any other way for us to go. And that's to protect their business. It wasn't for climate change. So again, that's where I think we have the greatest opportunity.
I think making that link towards the impact it will have on businesses is certainly, puts it in sort of tangible terms and versus sort of, hey, we've got this long-term view of climate change and so forth, and we all need to get involved. I mean, this is how it's directly impacting you today. I'd imagine a lot of my listeners probably, including myself, probably are not as familiar with the trickle effects that would occur across businesses as a result of restoring the carbon imbalance within the soil. What types of industries and businesses does this have the greatest influence or impact on in terms of getting this correct?
Well, all of them. And I'll explain that comment in a second. You want to go to the ones that it's going to directly impact first: the food industry, the apparel industry, the energy industry. It affects the energy industry in a couple of ways. As we know, we're getting more and more energy from things that are grown. So it affects that. That's number one. Number two, people get pissed off when I say this, it mitigates a lot of the negative effects of the fossil fuel energy production that we have today. And we get asked all the time, so are you giving them a free pass to keep polluting? And the answer is, of course not. What we're doing is, again, we're trying to extend the runway so we can get to a carbon neutral society, number one. And number two, burning fossil fuels, it's not just screwing up the environment. We're breathing carcinogens. So no, we're not giving them a free pass. But to answer your question, why it affects everybody, what we're doing, when you restore the soil, it does all the things I just talked about, but it does a couple of other things. You're growing healthier food. So what does that mean? That means healthier people. So what does that mean? That means a significant reduction in healthcare costs around the world. And you want to talk to a government when healthcare costs are projected to go to, I think it's $49 trillion in 25 years. And you're sitting, you can shave off a few $1 trillion. That's real money. The U.S. has talked about spending, I think over the next 25 years, a couple of $1 trillion on adaptation for climate change. Well, what if you don't have to spend all that money? So you're talking about economic impact at scale on healthcare. You're talking about restoring fresh water. We know that, wars are already starting about water. There isn't an industry. Go talk to Coca-Cola about how scared they are about not having access to water. They're, a flavored water company. Mm-hmm. So here's an astonishing benefit of what we're trying to do here is the healthy soil is not just a carbon sink, it's a water sponge. When you have healthy soil, it creates humus, which is basically a sponge. It holds on to water at astonishing amounts. And I'll give you an example. As you take industrially degraded soil and you bring it back to life, for every 1% of soil organic matter that gets restored, every 1%, that land will store anywhere from 25,000 to 60,000 gallons of water per hectare. So it becomes this sponge. And what that means is that when you go water your farms, you need significantly less. Yvon Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia, he and I did an op-ed a couple of months ago about how if California farmers had been growing regeneratively, they'd be growing the same amount of food. But even during the drought, they'd be achieving significant yields. The Dust Bowl happened because the soil was dead. Again, if they were protecting the health of the soil, that Dust Bowl wouldn't have happened, and they still would have grown food. So it's astonishing when you restore land. It's the most amazing thing, and we have pictures from all over the world where streams, ponds, rivers come back that have been gone for 20 years. And you sit there and say, where was the water? Where did it go? How did it come back? It comes back. It's astonishing. And it all starts happening in a year.
Yeah, I think we're just scratching the surface here. And I recommend to everyone listening to this conversation to go look some of this stuff up and go to your website and dig in some more, because, I've taken a look at some of the science here and it's really compelling stuff. And it's almost like the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Everything is connected to the simple initiative that we can all be a part of in terms of restoring the carbon imbalance in our soil. We're having this conversation a few days after the election of Donald Trump. So I have to sort of go there a little bit. And, of course, climate change has been a varying degree or level of priority in terms of different administrations. How dependent are you in terms of federal policies and the federal administration essentially getting behind and funding some of these developments versus being able to do it independent of who's in office?
Yeah, great question. And, we now have an administration that, who knows what's in their heart, but what they're saying is climate change is not real, and they're going to ramp up the fossil fuel industry, coal and oil. The day of the election, there was a UN climate conference going on in Morocco, and everybody there was shocked. Shocked at the election results. And they went into a major despair for about 24 hours, and then everybody basically said the same thing: screw the United States. We don't need the United States to succeed at this. We want them, but when you look at how much the United States, we're a very influential country, of course, but China is real serious about climate change right now. India.
But isn't the United States one of the biggest contributors towards, emissions and industrial agriculture and so forth as relative to the rest of the world?
We are, but let me give you an example of this, the soil formula. So it's estimated that we need about 22% of the land that's used for farming around the world, farming and ranching, to be converted to regenerative to restore the climate. That's all we got to do. So we can achieve that without the United States. Now, we're going to get the United States. So we're going to you're seeing more and more companies come out and say, we want to buy ingredients that were grown in a regenerative way. For all the reasons I talked about earlier, companies are now starting to significantly move in that direction. There's no supply, so we have to build the factories, the farms, the ranches have to be converted, and that's starting to happen as well. But companies are going to lead this. The government, state governments are going to lead this. California, which is the sixth largest economy in the world, it put $55 million into this year's budget to fund agriculture products in the state that draw down carbon. It's $55 million. It's not $1 billion, but it's a start. And more importantly, it's credibility to what we're talking about. When you have a giant agriculturally critical state like California saying, yes, we have to do this. This is important. So, the French government created something called the 4 per 1,000 program. And what that says is if you increase the soil organic matter by 4 1,000ths every year, if we did that, 4 1,000ths is not a whole lot. And in how we grow our food around the world, we would sequester all of the current emissions from the burning of fossil fuels today. So if we go to 5 1,000ths, we start drawing down. They now have 40 countries that have signed on to this program. Now it's starting to be implemented, but 40 countries. So, yes, of course, the United States, Donald Trump, he could put so much more stuff in the atmosphere that we hit the tipping point in a bad way before we hit it in a good way. Absolutely, could happen. And it just, it's ramped up the importance of what we're doing at drawing stuff down. And as I said, the good news is when you have corporations sitting there going, this is going to benefit my bottom line. I really don't care what the government policy is. This is going to benefit, I don't agree with it. I happen to acknowledge climate change, but I'm doing this for my business. That's going to keep the momentum going.
So irrespective of what this new administration ultimately does in regards to climate change, it sounds like the movement is already underway. Businesses get it because you're putting sort of that business rationale and impact into the equation of the supply chain dynamics of doing this. And really what federal policy ultimately does is either put the brakes on it to some degree and slow it down or put a gas pedal to the floor. And so it's basically just adjusting maybe the speed to which things get done. But ultimately you're saying that the movement has started, it's there, people are getting behind it irrespective of what this new administration does.
Yeah, and I say this a lot. If we had 50 years, I have incredible confidence that these giant industries would convert to this way of producing goods because it makes better business sense. It's, if you think about where renewable energy was 20 years ago and where it is today, we're talking about renewable food. We're talking about nature resupplying the front end of their supply chain for free, just like the sun gives us energy. So business will move in that direction because it's better for them. We don't have 50 years. So it's the race. That's what this is. It's the race that we're in.
You know, some of these goals and success metrics that you outlined, do you think we'll see this culminate in our lifetime?
I think if we don't, our lifetime's going to get pretty nasty pretty quickly. I really do. I really do. And you know, we're all about partnerships. You know, the elephant in the room is big ag and Monsanto and fertilizer companies. You know, and we never sit there and say they're the enemy, you know, because you know what? It doesn't serve us any good. I would rather have them sitting at the table with us, you know, saying, you guys know this stuff better than anybody. You know more about soil than anybody on earth. Help us figure this out. Right now, it's not going to happen. And, you know, one of the things the Trump administration is doing that is frightening is they've created a term called American agriculture, and that they want to export that to the world. And they may even tie it to trade deals. Well, the definition of that, it just put industrial, you know, instead of American in there. That's very concerning. And so, you know, again, that's one part of business. We feel we've got other very large industries. And, you know, if the biggest companies in the world, the biggest consumer packaged goods companies in the world say, you know what, we want to buy products that are grown or ingredients that are grown in this way, they're going to do it. It's going to, you know.
I mean, the long-term implications of exporting our industrial agricultural methods. I mean, it's kind of like the equivalent of, you know, corn export, you know, a few decades ago, which basically created the rise of high fructose corn syrup and mass production around the world and contributed to a lot of our health disparities that we see today that have really been influenced by some of the Western policies and exports.
Well, so, and to that, just a quick thing, you know, what helped create that were the subsidies for corn. And right now, what we're seeing at the USDA and the NRCS is a really exciting shift toward funding organic farms, regenerative farms, massive soil restoration projects. And that's very exciting. So you are starting to see a reallocation of funds. So there's hope in there as well.
Well, you know, as we're having this conversation, I'm sort of looking at my notes here and jotting down different things. It's interesting to look back at your life and your career and your adventures and sort of figure out how the dots all connect. And to be honest, I can't think of a better person to be on the job than someone like you. I mean, you started off as, you know, having grown up in sort of an entrepreneurial environment with a father in business, you know, on the ground, you know, working hard, ended up becoming a veterinarian, understanding the impact of human life and the real delicacy of human life and humanity. And then going into the creative world as a creative executive, as well as an entrepreneur, understanding how messages need to be told and translating complex information into understandable initiatives and potentially movements, and then having a little bit of a leg in the political world. I mean, that combination together right there speaks to me why you're the right person on the job to make something like the Carbon Underground a true success. You know, everyone listening to this podcast, I mean, is there something that you know, besides being a little bit more environmentally conscious, is there something that, you know, the average individual or everyone listening can actually do to help contribute to what the Carbon Underground is trying to accomplish?
Sure. And by the way, thank you for that bio of mine.
Not sure if you see it that way, but it was just really, you know, it was really interesting to see how those dots connected.
And I wasn't a veterinarian. I almost got there, but quit. But it is interesting. I do sort of look at why things happen in your life. And, you know, what was my training to learn about business and systems and government and the ability to communicate things. And I feel very blessed with the background I had. It did sort of give me some of the tools that are helping right now. But I'm one of many, 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 many people around the world who are working on this. And I'm not an implementer of what we have to do with the soil. And those are the heroes out there. The farmers are the heroes out there. So as far as what the public can do today, first and foremost, get educated and start talking about this. I really mean that. You know, you can go to our website. We've got a ton of stuff. Most of it's presented in a pretty digestible way. You can go to Regeneration International's website. They have a ton of stuff, same kind of thing. So start to get this into the dialogue, number one. Number two, you're going to see education in some of the stores that you're shopping in. We're going to be doing in-store education with co-ops and some of the bigger branded supermarkets, and engage in that. And, let them know that you're thankful that they're supporting food that is grown in this way and manufactured in this way. And the other thing is, and we're hoping for a 2017 launch of a program that is presently titled Adopt a Meter. And what that says is, and it's literally created to give the billions of people around the world who are terrified of climate change but feel impotent to do anything about it, the chance to do something about it. So for $5, you'll be able to adopt a square meter of degraded soil. We will take that money, we will combine it with other people's $5 or rupees or this or whatever it is, and we will give it to farmers to help them transform their soil, bring their soil back to health. And what that means is that piece of soil is going to go from emitting carbon into the atmosphere to drawing it back down into the soil. And, so we're hoping to launch that in 2017. If you hear that, adopt a meter or two.
All right. Adopt a meter. Great information. And the website is thecarbonunderground.com or .org?
.org. Easy to remember because just remember what we want. We want the carbon underground.
That's right.
That's where it came from. So,
I love that name.
Thank you.
Well, this is the point of our conversation where I ask all of my guests sort of a series of rapid fire Mad Lib fill in the blank so we can get to know you a little bit better and, improve ourselves as a result of doing that. So if you're okay with it, we'll jump into just 5 questions for you.
Go for it.
All right, let's start with the first one. So the first one is, the best piece of advice I ever received was?
Oh, that's easy. My dad raised all of us with the expression, imagine the possibilities. My whole life, I was challenged to look at whatever it was I was working on or reading about or thinking, and imagine the possibilities of it. And I'm trying to teach my daughter that today. It's the greatest gift I was ever given.
Yeah, that's a great one. Okay, next one. I am most curious about?
Everything. I know that's a cop-out. Sounds like a cop-out, but it's really not. I'll sit, if there's nothing to read, I'll read a package, the back of a package car. I'll read where it's manufactured. I don't care. I just love knowing stuff. And I'm a very curious person, which I think helped make me a better creative person, in business.
I'm the same way. Inspiration comes from some of the most unexpected places.
Oh, my
which
goodness.
is great.
Absolutely.
All right, next one for you. If you had to write an autobiography about yourself, the title of the book would be?
I can actually answer that because I've started writing this book, but not for the reason anybody might think. And the working title of that is How to Clean a Belly Button.
You got to explain that one.
Really? So when I grew up, I was morbidly obese. I mean, my entire childhood, I topped out in graduate school at 420 pounds. And I don't know what happened. I don't know what clicked, but I went on I took a year off my life. I moved where I didn't know anybody, and I got into nutrition and exercise, and I lost 223 pounds.
Wow.
And after doing that, about a year after, so I was sure I was keeping the weight off, I had an apron, the skin that had, covered my stomach all those years. And I had plastic surgery. And I had it removed, and the surgeon, first of all, the one thing that was sort of bizarre is before the surgery, he said to me, do you want an innie or an outie? And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I'm cutting off the part of your skin with your belly button, so I'm going to make a new one. What do you want? and so he built me a new one. And then after the surgery, he said, okay, now I have to teach you how to clean your belly button. So I just thought these are things that most people in their life will never go through. So it's always been the how to clean a belly button, because it's sort of a reminder to me about everybody. We all have a path that is unique to us. And, this is a big part of who I am.
I love that. That is such a fascinating response and title. I'd be the first to buy that book. I think it's fun. And that whole losing weight piece. I mean, I never knew that about you. I mean, that's a topic for another time, but we'd love to understand some of your secrets around that. All right, 2 more for you. So the next one is, if you could invite 3 people over for dinner, dead or alive, who would you invite and what would you talk about?
Da Vinci. These are probably probably going for the obvious, but maybe the most brilliant thinker ever with what he did. So I would just love to get inside that mind a little bit. Aristotle, because I've said for a long time, Aristotle was my mentor in the advertising business because of what he wrote about how to communicate to people and how to get through to people, how to motivate people. And I just found him to be just so insightful. And then I would probably mix in somebody like Elon Musk, who, I don't have to say anything. You know why.
Yeah, right. Just completely. There's nothing that's unstoppable for him, right?
Right. It's amazing. So I guess it would be those three. I also, there's a part of me that would think about inviting my grandfather, who died an hour after I was born, who I'm named after.
What, just sort of an ancillary to that question, what question would you want to ask all three if they're all there at dinner?
Wow.
Or what would be the topic of conversation that you'd want to raise?
It would probably be, I would want to get involved in their thought process, how they look at the world and process it, and how they, sort of put it in the sausage maker and have sausage come out the other end. These are brains that I just want to figure out how they work.
Yeah.
So there isn't really a question, but that it would be more the process. How did they get to the thinking and the doing levels that they achieved?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, last question for you, Larry. So on this podcast, as you know, we celebrate all the things that make us unique and make us different, hence unusual. So how would you fill in the following blank? I'm unusual because...
I think about this a lot. We live in a world where people are celebrated for being great at something. You're an expert in this. You're a celebrity for that. And I've felt my whole life that I'm a generalist. And it goes back to that being curious about everything. And I really don't think I'm great at anything. I think I'm good at a number of things. And, but I never look at myself and think I'm as good as that guy at playing the drums. I'm as good as this guy at so-and-so, or whatever it is that I do. There are times where I feel less than, but then I go back to that, it's who I am. And what I think has enabled me to do the things I've done in my life is that I've taken this horizontal approach toward life.
Yeah, I think you raise a really interesting point there, because I think as we get into this world of over specializations and super specialized experts, going down that path essentially diminishes or reduces your element of curiosity in this world, and really puts, some of those horse blinders on. And I think this, having this jack of all trades, curiosity across the spectrum is actually a rarity these days. And I feel like we need more of that. I love that quality about you. I think that's great.
Well, thank you. It's the interconnectedness of everything that I feel I get to sort of see by seeing, and learning about how all these different things work. And, hey, we need the experts. We need the geniuses. We need those guys, please. But somebody's got to be connecting the dots, even if you're just looking at a particular system, a natural system, a business system, or whatever, which is still bringing in all these different facets. But, as the world gets harder, which it is, adaptability is more and more important these days, I think, and that means curiosity is more important these days. At least that's my philosophy. So.
Well, wonderful. Larry, it is always a delight speaking to you. Thank you so much for being on the show. You know what I forgot to mention, you've got some incredible explanatory videos that are on your website. Again, that's thecarbonunderground.org. I recommend everybody go check it out and see what you're up to. If any of our listeners wanted to find you in the sort of interwebs, where would they go? Do you have a Facebook profile, Twitter feed, anywhere that you would direct them to go?
I do. The truth of the matter is I still do most of my communicating on email, texting. I'm not going to give my number out, and you can always reach me. You can go to the Carbon Underground and contact us and just say, please send a Larry, or I'm L. Kopald Kopald at thecarbonunderground.org. And I would welcome any conversations that may happen. This is about spreading the word and creating a movement, and we need all oars in the water.
Well, thank you so much, Larry, and we'll certainly do our part, and good talking to you.
Back at you. This was great. Thank you.
Hi again. It's me, Dr. G. If you are still listening, I'm hoping it's because you enjoyed this podcast. If you would like to hear future episodes, you could really help me out by subscribing to the That's Unusual podcast on iTunes and leaving a review. It goes a long way in helping me get the word out from avid listeners like you. As a thank you, I will be selecting one new reviewer each week at random for a free private 15-minute phone conversation where you can ask me anything and get professional advice on your career or business to help you stand out and make a difference. Also, if you want to be notified of any future episodes, please visit that'sunusualpodcast.com and sign up to receive updates on new episode releases. Until next time, remember to always think unusual.